Welcome to the Igniting Change podcast. My name is Duncan Cook, founder of Three-Sided Cube, trusted technology partner for some world-changing organizations. We know the power that technology has to have a positive impact on people's lives. But on this podcast, myself and my co-hosts Puff and Sophie are out to meet the people behind the technology, hear their stories and understand what drives them, and hopefully inspire others to join the mission and do some good in the world.
Fantastic. Okay, well, Max, thank you for joining us today. Happy 2024. This is my first official meeting of 2024, and I'm really excited. I say meeting, gathering maybe. I don't know how we want to describe it, but I'm really excited to chat more. So thank you for joining us, Max. Did you want to introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do and what organization you're with?
Yes, thank you, Puff, and happy 2024 to you too. Excited to be joining you on Igniting Change today. So, my name is Max Dakin. I am the Deputy Director of Philanthropy Data Strategy at UNICEF USA, and I am based here in Portland, Maine.
That is quite the title there, Max.
It's a
Quite
mouthful.
a lot. So tell me, what exactly do you do for UNICEF?
So UNICEF USA is the U.S. National Committee for UNICEF, of course, the UN Humanitarian Agency for Children. And at UNICEF USA, our focus is to advance UNICEF's mission within the American market. And really, that means to increase awareness of UNICEF's work with the American public through fundraising and advocacy. And so my role is within UNICEF USA's philanthropy division, which is focused on raising philanthropic support from individuals and organizations in the United States. And my role specifically is around developing and advancing our philanthropy data strategy. And what that means is that data is such an important asset and tool for organizations today. UNICEF USA, we are really committed to and invested in our data and making better use of our data and technology. And so my role is to take that strategy and sort of think about how it applies to fundraising and philanthropy. How are we using data to generate more resources to impact children around the world?
Amazing and so eloquently put there, Max. Thank you. And data is like a huge topic right now. There are so many people talking about data, and look, we all know it's hugely important. But I feel like you've got your work cut out for you, Max. I think there's so much going on in this space, and I think it's just going to become even more important. How long have you been doing the role?
So this role that I've been in only about a year and a half, I would say. So I've been with UNICEF USA for a little over 2.5 years. And in that time, I've held a couple of different roles within the organization, all within philanthropy, but starting out with prospect research for high net worth philanthropy, and then moving into what I do now, which is about more data analysis, data analytics, and developing data strategy.
So, was data always on the roadmap for you, Max? Has it always been something that you've been interested in, or have you just kind of fallen into this position naturally?
Well, it wasn't really originally part of my background, and I think you'll hear a lot of people say in the fundraising and philanthropy sector more broadly that it wasn't a career path that they would have imagined or chosen, and so that's the case for me as well. And also, the sort of data and technical part was not part of my background at all. I actually started out really more interested in the humanities. I had a liberal arts education. My first sort of passion or interest was actually theater. And so I worked at a Shakespeare theater company for a couple years when I was a teenager, and really thought that I was interested in going into theater and performance and being on the stage. And as part of that experience, I got some time working behind the scenes at the organization and learning what it takes to, keep the lights on and keep the enterprise running. And decided that I was actually more interested in that than the life of a full-time artist. So that was my first exposure to what it takes in order to, do good work as a nonprofit organization in the world, and all the work that goes into that. After that theater experience, when I was in college, I worked part time in the college alumni office, just as a side job, and that was my first exposure to the discipline of fundraising, because I was sitting right next to the advancement team who was, raising money for the college endowment and scholarships and programs and facilities and all that. And I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. It's a combination of some different things that I like. There's some, personal interaction, relationship building involved. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of sort of thinking and strategy development. And so after I graduated, I thought maybe I'll give this fundraising thing a try. It sounds kind of interesting. So that was my first foray into the world of fundraising and philanthropy.
And this is a really tough gig, like fundraising right now, with so many external factors that are almost working against you. Like, how are you finding it?
I think it's actually really inspiring, and it is also very challenging, and it can be, you know, frustrating at times. It can be, disheartening. I think it takes a lot of uh, endurance and patience and teamwork in order to get used to the challenges of fundraising. There's a lot of rejection. You have to be very comfortable being in a scenario where you're getting told no a lot. There's a lot of different personalities that you have to interact with, and trying to balance different priorities and different needs. But I will say some of the most inspiring stories of people doing good in the world have come through my experience with philanthropy. And so being able to see some of that in action, those are the sort of redeeming factors that help navigate through the challenges. And I'm not personally in a frontline fundraising role, calling or interacting with donors or writing grants, which I did do in the past, but not anymore. But partnering with those frontline fundraisers is really inspiring to hear from them, their experiences in that field.
Yeah, and I think you've got experience on the front line doing that stuff, but I almost think doing what you do, it's still as hard, right? You still need to have that understanding. You need to have that empathy. You need to have kind of like your finger on the pulse of what's going on, as to how you best navigate that, and then using the data to really understand how you can take that forwards. So going from, let's say, and I'm really simplifying it here, so let's get going from kind of like frontline to now using data and technology a little bit more. Was that quite a steep learning curve, or was it something that you've always been really interested in?
It was a steep learning curve, but one that I was very eager to pick up. So I had been, my first role in fundraising was as a grant writer. So I was writing foundation grants, corporate sponsorships, government grants, that sort of thing for artistic and education programs. This is when I was working at a performing arts center in Washington, D.C. And that was a good introduction to the field, and I learned a lot. But I also started to get dissatisfied with the cyclicality of that work, and sort of the same things were happening every year. I wasn't learning as much as I wanted to learn, or growing as much as I wanted to grow. And an opportunity came up that the department I was in wanted to start doing some data analytics work. It was a new position that had just been created. The work had never been done before. They were, looking for somebody to fill that role. I had no training or background in that work whatsoever. It was just sort of, a side interest of working with a little programmatic data. But I was really keen for it, and went through the application process, and they were generous in giving me the opportunity to step into that role and learn for the first time. And so all of my training and education has been self-study since I started. I don't have a degree in the field, and I've done additional coursework and such, but it's all been on my own time, so to speak.
But Max, that's so inspiring, and I think that's probably, well, it is kind of the way that this sector, this space is working right now, because so much change is happening so quickly that people don't have time to always, take a step out, go and get an academic certification, and then kind of step back in. They're learning on the job, they're learning as they go. And I think to hear stories from real people like yourself, Max, that are learning on the job, like, like going around trying to work out how to do stuff, like that's the reality for a lot of people out there. But honestly, I find that not many people like to talk about this, because it's almost like, well, that's not the way it should be done.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the reality, that's the way that it's actually working in industry today.
I agree with that, Puff. And it's so important especially when you consider the fact that nonprofit organizations often have a difficult time attracting certain types of talent. There's a sort of, perennial uh, challenge or struggle in the industry around, how do we attract talent that has the technical expertise or technical experience when we're competing with the private sector or with the government, for those same employees. We can't afford the compensation, we can't afford the benefits, et cetera, et cetera. At least that's a common complaint that I've heard and challenge that I've observed. And I think that what you're describing, this approach of more of a homegrown talent development, giving people the opportunity to learn things, as part of their work responsibilities, and taking that time, having organizations invest in that sort of small learning for their workforce is hugely important. I found that the technical stuff that I've learned over the years is very teachable. And today there are so many resources at many different price points, right? With the internet, to be able to learn new skills, not just technical skills, but I think especially technical skills. That is something that is so teachable. I think what is harder to teach is sort of the spirit of philanthropy and understanding of the nonprofit sector, how a nonprofit organization works. And that mindset that comes through joining or having experience in that sector, paired with that self-learning, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I think you need that drive, you need that dedication to make sure that you do go on and do it and learn and push yourself, because it's really easy, I think, to become complacent in a role. But it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job, Max, of pushing yourself and learning new things. And the fact that you've taken on like it's a completely new role. How have you found it? Because when something is so new, you're like pioneering a path for others, really. You're going to be, I would imagine, growing this space more and more internally within UNICEF.
That's my goal. And I'm somebody who loves to learn by default, and that's really when I feel the most fulfilled, is when I'm developing new skills or learning new things. Not everybody is like that, and that's okay. But I do feel passionate about trying to help people take advantage of some of the new capabilities there are around data and technology. I love to coach other people one-on-one, or to coach groups. I've done a lot of training in my time, and just the satisfaction that comes from learning how to do something new that makes our jobs easier or that saves time. That's a very fulfilling process, because we all have limited amounts of time, And, sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, let me show you how I do this thing in Microsoft Excel. Have you ever seen this before? And suddenly that one trick, has saved somebody hours and hours of work, right? And without that sort of connection and shared learning, those opportunities don't happen.
Right. I have to ask, and Max, if you don't have an answer, don't worry. But do you have a go-to place that you go to for help or for learning that you love or that you would like to shout out on this episode?
That's a great question. I would say the place that I learn the most is from people that are in my network. So one of the things that I've found valuable in my career is being a part of professional associations or interest groups, whether that's, a formal association with meetups and whatnot, or even just online communities. The two that I've been most active in over the years is APRA, which is the Prospect Research Association here in the US, and then AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. But I found that, most of my learning of new things comes a lot from interacting with other people in my network and saying, hey, I have this problem, how would you approach this? Or, hey, we're working on this cool thing, I thought you might like to know. But that sort of that crowdsourcing of knowledge is really helpful, especially when trying to think about the application to our work in a shared language. I could go on to Google or Stack Overflow or something and search for a question or look up some keywords for a problem I'm working on. But it's rarely going to be within that context. I have to take that step of saying, how does this solution or how does this explainer apply to what I'm doing today? Whereas if I call up, my buddy who's working at another organization, they'll be able to say, oh, well, I had a similar issue and this is how I solved it in my own context. So I find that, going to my network, whether it's, a list serve or a Slack channel or something like that, really helps to, get that knowledge going.
And I think that's great advice. And I it's almost like I've planned this, and I promise you I haven't, for those listening at home. But Max joined one of our roundtables all around data, and that's how we've met, and we've had the opportunity to meet Max. But really interestingly, in this space, in this data space, there are some now emerging groups coming into play. And I think what we found really interesting is our roundtables. We cover a variety of different topics, but our data roundtable has been the most popular by far, in that we're now holding quite a few more going forwards on planned all around data, because people helping each other and sharing tips and sharing, common problems or challenges that they're facing, and I guess offering advice and solutions together, and kind of rubber ducking things together. I think it's great. And I think we've certainly found that, just kind of almost being on the outside, like a lot of our projects do, we do handle a lot of data, we do help organizations collect a lot of data, but there are so many challenges that you face around, and certainly in this space right now, that I found that these roundtables and these networks are becoming even more important. So I think that's great advice, Max. And for anyone listening, we do have a roundtable group all around data, so if you are interested, please do get in touch. You could reach me at puff@threesidedcube.com for more info.
And Puff, I would just say
Awesome.
I loved being included in that roundtable opportunity, and being able to get connected with people that I was not familiar with before, but brought together in a shared space around a familiar language. A good conversation in the moment, but then also an opportunity to build those connections offline as well and keep that conversation going. And I would encourage, like, anyone who's interested in getting into the field or sector at large. I think most people are pretty generous about meeting new people, sharing what they know, sharing advice and tips. Not only on a day-to-day basis for my job do I find that valuable, but also every step that I've taken in my career has been because of the connections that I've made. I would encourage anyone, if you're looking to get into any aspect of the field in any way, find interesting people and reach out to them, because most people will say yes.
Amazing. And honestly, if you are listening to this and you are thinking, oh, I need some help or advice with this, and you have someone on your radar, just reach out to them. The worst they can do is ignore you or say no. Like, it's not 9 times out of 10, and certainly with all of the guests that I've spoken to on Igniting Change, someone has helped them and they have got back to them. So it's absolutely worth reaching out. So do please take the plunge. Do it in 2024. You might be pleasantly surprised. Right. So, Max, have you got any examples of tech for good in your space, in your role right now?
Absolutely. So there are two main ways that I think we're doing at UNICEF USA to use data and technology. And I'm really going to focus more on the data side of technology, since that's my focus and interest area. But the two areas where we're really trying to grow, one is around data informed decision making. And that's really how we operate as an organization, how we use the information we have to make better decisions that help to grow the organization and sustain its work. And then the other is really specifically around increasing awareness of UNICEF's work with the public at large, and trying to use the tools and technology we have to get that message out, to build that community, in a market that's very saturated with information and, things that are trying to take our attention. So just starting with the data informed decision making, as you were saying at the beginning, we have so much data. The data field is exploding in terms of the data that's being generated, the way that we have to collect data. And then the challenge is, how do we store and process and get insights out of all that information that's living in many different systems at the same time? I myself, I have maybe, you know, 30 to 40 different apps that I interact with on a regular basis within my toolkit, right? And that's just a lot of different tools and silos of data that don't always talk to each other. So, one of the main projects that our technology team has been working on the past couple of years is developing a data warehouse, really a central repository where key information from different systems is flowing into the same place in a structured way that we can use to analyze and get insights out of. So, for example, we have an email marketing platform. We have Google Analytics looking at our website. We have social media listeners. We have our constituent database, our CRM, that's tracking donations and customer interactions. We have platforms that we're using to develop and run events and registrations. And all of these systems represent one sort of window or doorway that our constituents are interacting with us as an organization, right? And so what we're trying to do with the data warehouse is bring those together to get a more holistic picture of what our constituents are interested in, what do they care about, how do they interact with us, and using that to help guide our strategy for marketing, for communications, for fundraising, and all of the above. So that's been a long time project, but I think one is a little bit, it's maybe not as flashy as some other technology initiatives, but it's so valuable to the organization to have that sort of single source of information that can be used for different purposes.
It's really funny how, when we've spoken with guests on the show, people are always nervous about talking about how important these foundational projects are. Like, it doesn't need to be flashy, but this is super important to get right. But And interestingly, this is something that quite a lot of organizations are trying to do right now. But there are 2 points here. One is that you said this has been going on for a while. Like, this isn't an easy thing to do. This is a really, really hard thing to do. And the second thing is how overwhelming to have all that data. It's almost like death by data. Like, what's important? How do you decide what data you're going to use from that warehouse? Or are you just going to pull all of the data in that warehouse and then work that out? Like, how does that work, Max?
Well, some of it is really specific to a particular area of the organization. So, for example, in a really dedicated way, I'll try to pick one example. Our email marketing operation, right, is going to be really specifically interested in email data, right? So, response and click through rates and conversions and, performance of different campaigns and A/B testing and that sort of thing. So that's really relevant to their focus area. But then I think the more interesting questions can come up when we start to bridge across that information to other areas of the organization. So, for example, if I'm over in the more sort of individual fundraising domain, I might have some different questions that relate to email data than, our email marketing does about, well, what kinds of messages perform best with different segments of our donor base, or what do certain people tend to click on, what stories are interesting to them, how can I use that to deliver more relevant content to them in the future, or offer different opportunities for engagement, and those questions might not come up within one pillar of the organization, but when we make that information available and structured to other areas of the team, then we can start having more sort of deeper questions, or looking at a more holistic view of the constituent experience. So part of it is selecting like what's relevant to the day-to-day operations of our business today, but then also like what might be interesting to somebody else to look at that they maybe haven't thought about before, and maybe they're not aware that we have access to that information.
So, and you don't have to answer this, but the data warehouse that you have, that's always going to be ongoing, right? Because there's always going to be new data that you can pull into that warehouse. But how do you surface that data? Do you have a series of dashboards? Like, how does it work?
So the primary tool that we use to interact with the data warehouse is Power BI, which is our reporting and data visualization tool. Primarily, so far, we've used that in more of a structured report and development process. So, we collect different business needs for reporting. We go through the process of saying, what are the requirements for this report? What data do we need from these different tables? What are the KPIs need to look like? And then a product is developed and published for consumption. We really, over the past couple of years, transitioned a lot of reporting that was just being done like in Excel into Power BI. And the advantage of that is it saves a lot of time, a lot of staff time. We get more closer to real-time information that's coming from a trusted source, right? So that we're taking away opportunities for, manual data entry errors or that sort of thing as much as we can. And then the visualization component as well, that moving beyond just like spreadsheets and tables opens up new ways to help people consume information, people who are not as familiar with or used to, reading columns and rows of numbers, right? So using things like charts and graphs and different visualizations helps with that. So that's sort of, I would say, the more like prescriptive approach to using Power BI. Where we would like to go with it is more of what we're calling self-service analytics or data enablement. And that means trying to extend the capability of interacting with our data to, more users within the organization, to say, you don't have to be a developer or a data analyst or a technical specialist to interact with data, because everyone has business questions. And so, what happens when we democratize the ability to interact with our different data sources? That's the next phase of what we're trying to do.
I love that. I absolutely love that self-service data. It's brilliant. So how, when you say that's the next phase, like the timings for that, like is it, I mean, that's again, it feels like another quite beefy project to undertake as an organization.
Absolutely. And some of that work has already begun, and I expect really over the next calendar year, we'll make some significant progress on that. But the main components of that, one is deciding, as we were talking about before, what data do we want to make available to a wider audience? And so part of that is data selection, but then also structuring it in a way that's easy to comprehend. So, as somebody who works a lot with data, like, I can look at a table in the data warehouse and I can query it with SQL, and I can, write a script to interact with it or that sort of thing. Most people at the organization, would not be interacting with data in such a way, right? So, the first challenge is like, how do we create data sets that are more prepackaged and that, sort of have all of that context and documentation that help people understand, what does this mean? It could be donations data, it could be email data, it could be web activity. What are the sort of packages that we want to make available? And then the second part is around like training and education. So, if we make data available, it's not enough just to say, hey, go run with it and figure it out, right? There's a little bit of a learning curve with how to use the tools, how to interact with it. And I think more important than the tool part is helping people understand how to think about data, how to translate and interpret what they're seeing in a way that helps them answer their business question. So often it's like trying to understand what are the right questions to ask, and translating those like business questions into data questions.
So good. Oh my gosh, you're really inspiring me. Like as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, like we need to be doing that more as an organization. And I'm sure there are so many listeners out there thinking the same if they're not already undertaking something like that. So that was the first area. The second area you mentioned was all around increasing awareness. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so increasing awareness, I think that's trying to build on top of that sort of foundation of integrated data, to get a little bit more personalized with the messaging that we're sending out to our constituents or the opportunities that we're offering to get engaged. So, one project that I know our marketing communications team is working on is developing some constituent personas, using that aggregated data to understand what are some, common different types of ways that people interact with us. And then what does that tell us about how we, should be approaching them, or trying to get them more engaged, whether that's through, making a donation, but also, signing a petition, taking an advocacy action, coming to an event, starting a local club in their school, getting involved in a committee, so many different ways to be engaged. But I think the personas help to sort of shape that energy of like, how are we approaching, different groups of our constituents. So a lot of that relies on like segmentation and developing different data models to do that. So, we've done stuff like, modeling constituent affinity, like, how close does somebody feel to our organization? What's their likelihood to make a donation or take an action? What's their level of loyalty? And that all those different segments and data models help us make decisions about like, how to send a certain message or appeal, or how to, try to engage somebody differently. But one of the other like more specific ways that we've tried to get more data oriented or digital is around our UNICEF Trick or Treat campaign. So you might be familiar with this Trick or Treat for UNICEF tradition that started actually back in 1948 as a Halloween themed tradition. So far, we've raised over $195 million for children through that program. But it started out as collecting change in boxes, these little fold-up boxes that kids would bring around from door to door on Halloween. And so a couple of years ago, in response to the pandemic conditions where people weren't out and socializing as much, our marketing team had the brilliant idea to transition this into a digital experience rather than a physical experience. So instead of little paper boxes, we had QR codes. So kids could walk around with a little printed out piece of paper with a QR code. People could go to a website, donate online. That was sort of the replacement of the channel. But then what that opened up for us as an organization was this whole different way to help people learn about UNICEF's work and become engaged in a different way, right? So instead of just, a knock on the door and put your change in a bucket, we're able to create online storytelling, video, immersive experience, ways to interact on social media that really like deepens the experience of learning about UNICEF and its work rather than just sort of the more transactional relationship. And so that's, I think, one of the powerful ways that we can use technology and data is, creating a richer experience for constituents who are interacting with our cause and who want to support us in a certain way.
It's amazing. And out of interest, do you, as an organization, write case studies around this stuff? And like, if someone was listening today and they wanted more information around that trick or treat campaign, let's say, where would they go to find more information around this? Because it's great, like it's an incredible story.
That's a great question, Puff. And I think the primary place that you could go for that, we have a website, trickortreatforunicef.org, which has our sort of most recent campaign from 2024, along with some history of the appeal and that sort of thing. I don't know off the top of my head if we've done any specific case studies, but I'm happy to look into that and get back to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Max. And I always say, because, we speak to so many guests and they all share these incredible examples. And what I love about this particular sector is everyone's happy to share these examples, but I never know whether or not they get turned into, case studies that's the only like words I can think of to describe it, but it's inspiration for other organizations to understand, okay, well, how can they deepen that connection? How might they do what UNICEF have done? So going from the physical world to the digital world to really deepen that connection, and increase the awareness of what the organization does. So wonderful. Thank you, Max.
You're welcome.
So conscious of time, but are there any other examples of tech for good that you want to shine a light on, whether it be for UNICEF or not? Like any other examples that you want to share?
So I would say the areas that I'm most interested in terms of what's happening in the sector is sort of continuing that theme of personalizing the constituent experience and a relationship with an organization. If you work at a smaller organization, and I would say 90% of nonprofit organizations in the United States are very, very small. It's possible as an individual or as a small team to create relationships with most of your constituents on a personal basis, right? Whether that is, meeting them at an event or, calling them on the phone or, sending a thank you email, like that personal connection is much easier at a smaller organization. But as you get larger, the scale gets larger as well. And so suddenly what happens when, you're trying to work with, hundreds of thousands or millions of constituents that might be interested in your cause, and you're, relatively small team compared to that, right? We all only have so much time. So I think the area that's most intriguing and inspiring to me is how are we using technology to deliver a more personal relationship at scale. So I'll give one example that we've started to use in different situations is video messaging. So instead of sending just a straight up, email outreach or a phone call, of actually recording a personalized video and sending that in an email. The tool that we use for that is called ThankView. And what we're seeing is that those sort of personalized messages, it maybe takes, a minute for me to record that and send that out, but we're seeing higher open rates, higher click-through rates, higher conversions, automatically moving beyond that, like, just a random person is emailing me, into a much more personalized engagement. Hi Puff, hope you're doing well. Would love to tell you about something that's exciting that's happening about UNICEF, right? That it's just much more engaging and exciting. And I think tools like that are making it possible to do that with not just, the people in my address book, but potentially, tens of thousands of people as well, right? And it takes me only a limited amount of time to do that. So I know a lot of that is happening in the higher education space in the U.S. today. It's, moving into different areas, like ours. But that is, I think, the more intriguing ways. Like, how do we help people feel connected to us as an organization and part of a community, rather than just like, oh, I get all these emails from them all the time, or, I get a postcard in the mail, which feels a lot more impersonal. People today, I think, are looking for more of that connection and community to the causes they care about.
And I think that's even more important because of how the working world is with this hybrid way of working. Not everyone is in an office physically working with people these days. So it's become even more detached. So people are really craving that personal touch. And as you were talking, Max, it got me really excited because I can totally relate. And just to give a shout out, what was the tool name? Was it ThankView?
ThankView, yep.
ThankView. Okay, because interesting story. We, as a team here at Three Sided Cube, we are looking for better ways of working internally. And one of the things that has really helped our team work well or better together is using a tool called Loom, recording very quick personalized videos that really help with training and development. It takes seconds to record something, and then you can record a personalized message of, if you're working on a shared document or a project together, and just explaining something. It's so much quicker than having to manually type email, Slack, Basecamp, whatever tool it is that you're using. But just doing that quick video, and actually it's doing exactly what ThankView are doing, is that tailored comms, isn't it? In a more personal way, but using video. And it's the snippets of video, like you can get across so much more with audio visual rather than just, type like written comms. That feels really almost archaic now. I know it's not, and it is still very important. But I think the use of video is and tailored video as well is so powerful. So it's really interesting that you guys are now starting to use that more and more. I would imagine it's probably a trend that we're going to be seeing a lot of organizations doing more and more of.
I agree with that, and I love that you're using that sort of technique internally, Puff. I think that's great tool, and in that sort of hybrid workforce today, especially a globally distributed workforce. I know, on my team we have people across all U.S. time zones. We have people who travel internationally. We're working with UNICEF colleagues in different countries, so being able to collaborate asynchronously, like that is really important. And I think the organizations that figure out how to do that well are going to be the most successful.
Absolutely. Now I'm conscious, obviously we've talked a lot around data and using the data and presenting the data, but any thoughts on AI and what are some of the challenges faced around that? I'm loath to talk about it because it's a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for a while. But any thoughts or feelings around that, Max?
Great question, Puff. I think there's a lot of hype around it right now, and I think it's probably overhyped. I think a lot of times when people are talking about AI today, they're talking about generative AI, things like ChatGPT or DALI or Bing Chat or whatnot, which is really only a small slice of what the world of machine learning has to offer. And I usually prefer to use that term because it's a little bit more, I think, down to earth. But I think there are lots of possibilities, and I also think that it's so early in the explosion of that organizations that are using machine learning well have it at a very limited scale to solve a very particular problem. It is not a all-purpose fix everything type of deal. So I think I'm excited about the possibilities. I'm not as afraid of it as others might be. I think it's worthwhile for everyone to have at least a baseline understanding of what that means or what's involved in those technologies, even if you're not a practitioner yourself. Um, but I think there's a lot of interesting ways that we could be using it in the nonprofit sector, both internally in terms of like helping to make our work more efficient and save time and process information very quickly. But then also like from a programmatic perspective as well. I know there have been many examples of nonprofit organizations using more traditional machine learning for things like identifying patterns, whether it's finding lead pipes in Michigan that should be replaced, or identifying disease behaviors, or finding uh, I don't know, areas where like water is likely to be drilled, right? Like there are many applications that are sort of more at that traditional supervised machine learning level rather than like sort of the exciting AI hype of today. So I think it's an exciting space to be watching and keeping aware of, and maybe doing some experimentation. But I think organizations should be cautious not to think of it as like a solve all for their problems. And in fact, there are some real risks that should be avoided in plunging headlong.
Yeah, and I would totally echo that. It's not going to solve everything. There will definitely be some opportunities for organizations for efficiencies to really help people work smarter, not harder. But I think there are going to be some real challenges with that. And I think one of them is a lot of people are talking around it right now. But I always hear a lot of talk. For me, it's understanding and pinpointing those really good examples. And you alluded to it earlier. There are going to be specific use cases where it's used really, really well, but they will be so specific. And I think that's where it's going to work to its best rather than the general, like writing copy for marketing campaigns. Cool. But like, it's not going to be, we're not there yet, So I do think the more specific, the stronger the results. So that was a great point.
I agree with
Thank you,
that.
Max.
And I think from a learning perspective, I don't think it's necessary for everyone to learn how AI works or how to develop a machine learning solution. But I think if someone is out there looking for a way to, get a competitive advantage in their career and a skill that's valuable, being able to understand what questions machine learning is good at solving or is, relevant at solving, is a really important skill to be able to do that translation and help somebody else or help a leader understand should we be exploring a machine learning solution for this or not, being able to understand like what it's good at and what it's not. That I think is going to be a really important career skill to have in the future.
Definitely agree with that. Definitely agree. And, I, like everyone, I think in this space, learning on the job, we're learning. And, you know, I don't need to know the specifics of exactly how it works, but I think having some first-hand experience and playing about with what tools exists, I would highly recommend. If you haven't had a go on some of the tools out there, then if you've got some downtime, have a play, see what's possible, start pushing it around. And I think it just comes back to that theme of learning on the job. Don't be afraid to have a play with these things. Spend some time investing in your personal development in this space for sure, because I think it's going to be very, very important over the next few years, definitely. Right. Well, Max, thank you so much for your time. Do you know what? I could have talked for another few hours, Max. Thank you. It's been brilliant, really, really inspiring. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for your time, Max.
Thank you, Puff. It's been a pleasure talking to you and sharing a little bit about my experience. And so glad to have this platform to share a little bit about UNICEF USA's work and talk about some interesting challenges today.
Brilliant.